Hi, I'm Chris Kleiner, and this is my portfolio video for the AI tool that I've been working on, known as Applied AI Workflow Design. So, after a few years of doing schoolwork, working in human services profession for many years, and coming from a very mixed technical background, I think like a lot of people, I discovered that AI is wonderful and it's amazing until it's not, and it can be very quickly not amazing when we live in the black box world that we know of, where we don't really know what's going on underneath with the model, and it's kind of hit or miss. We can get amazing returns, or we can, just end up in left field. So I've been working very hard on addressing that through methodology, which I am calling applied AI workflow design. So the goal is not app fluency. There are a lot of great apps. I'm not against them. I just don't think that most of them provide real transparency. They speak language, they talk about ethics, and they will use social work values, NSAW, and they can speak to it, but they can't really point to it. You can't audit it. And that's what I think is missing. And so that's what I'm going to get into for a little bit today. So the key unit is the workflow record, not the chat, the transcripts, and how we're going to use those surfaces after we finish whatever workflow we're doing to look at how we did, what we did, how we can do it better, and so on. Excuse me while I get this going. So, with my background, I have 15 years in direct patient care and mental health. The last 13 years have been with Veterans Affairs and vocational rehabilitation in the hospital side, which has been rapid employment, meeting with people to work on their barriers, maybe legal history, mental health, dual diagnosis, so on and so forth. So, it's been 13 years of writing short bulleted statements on strengths perspectives, essentially. I am former U.S. Air Force F-16 aircraft avionics specialist, so high reliability, sensitive systems. A lot of experience as a touring musician, recording studio professional, especially in the digital audio workspace, so signal path routing, parallel processing, where you're not just running cables. I do know analog, but this isn't running cables. This is basically matrixing it in your mind. And I'm going to lay out the AAIWD connection, basically visible workflows, govern interactions, useful outputs, and audible records. So I started with my internship at philanthropy.org. They are a crowdfunding platform for emergency veterinary care. I started with them at my UTK bachelor's program and just intuitively started using workflow methods in the AI because I realized that when I try to do more than one function in a single work environment, they call them chats. I call them workflows or work environments. It can go off the rails. And so very early on, I sought and received permission to use AI to stage the research, which was interesting because it led me into things that they weren't asking for me to compile. And I discovered One Health, and it's particularly at UTK, and learned a lot about it and set up the workflow that I was able to get very focused returns. The feedback, I have the text. I don't have an award letter in my hand because I was just an intern, but the texts and the emails from the CEO founder was that the extra One Health data that I found and through organizing my AI research is what really put it over the top and helped them get a $204,000 award to do a long-term grant study where they're going to basically survey users to see what works. And so this was a really good way to build my practices, which became tools and methods, and to get real outputs. So essentially, what is applied AI workflow design? It's a system of methods and tools that are visible, evidence rooted, and auditable. So it's practices, how you're going to do your workflow, how you're going to organize it, how you're going to make it so others can read it, and then how you're going to audit it later. I strongly believe that AI work becomes professional when the process can be explained, checked, corrected, preserved, and handed off. A lot of apps don't have that. They can put out great outputs for a single user, but if that person leaves or the app changes, you're starting over. That's what we're trying to avoid here. So there's a lot of standards I've been checking out, obviously, but my favorite is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, also known as NIST, in particular the AI RMF playbook, where it's pretty dense, but it's very in depth and very clear. And they focus on govern, map, measure, and manage, which is rules and accountability, evidence, controls. And it's pretty dense, as you can see in the left-hand side of this. By the way, This is for all for a portfolio. This video, as well as all the evidence, this slideshow will be in that portfolio so people can look through more focused if they want. But I'm taking what's very dense from NIST and then porting it over to just a very simple statement, which is true. I'm going to show how I do that. A process that can be scoped, which is mean design, set up your workspace before you go in, monitored, corrected, and audited. Why does a governance workflow matter more than an app? Speed without governance, which is not limited to, but does include apps because there's a blindness there inherently. Fast outputs, but if there is a mistake and there's likely to be with AI or even a human error, it's going to scale those mistakes because it's all contextual. It'll build off of that. And what looks good and sounds good and is formatted and otherwise perfect can have a major underlying error that can be an embarrassment or a catastrophic failure, depending on if you're dealing with policymakers, potential funders, so on and so forth. Governance without speed, which is if you were just to take the NIST, the RMF playbook, which is very dense, very long, and not for an average person trying to just help people to sort through, people are going to subvert it. They're going to go around, they're going to avoid it, there's going to be resistance. The goal is to get efficient, scalable, accountable work that has judgments and evidence, and audibility is going to be the key word I wear out during this presentation. So I wanted this slide to pop, so I made it very bright and loud because there's a lot of talk, especially again, I'm not trying to pick on apps, but people will talk about the ethics and transparency, and those are great and those are important. And I think that ethics and transparency are the probably most important considerations when using AI, but I don't think they're the first. And I think if they're not, if the outputs you're getting aren't first useful, which means you actually get something accomplished that's usable for your clients or your workplace, reliable, which means you have enough of a scope and going in that you can trust your outputs and you can replicate it by having the templates that you use to spin up. And then when you audit when you're finished, that is organizational intelligence that does a couple things. It makes your processes better for you as a user, and it also fortifies the organization and really to help protect against organizational amnesia. One person might have done a great research project, they leave or they get promoted, they're going somewhere else, somebody else comes up, they don't have a way to do it. They're starting from scratch. We have AI. We want to avoid that. So useful, reliable, replicable, teachable, and auditable. Those are functions that I've put into this that rather than speak to ethics and transparency, they are the mechanics of those, or at least they're working towards those quite reliably, actually. Okay, so I'm demonstrating my own highly governed workspace through a system that I developed for myself called Professional Strategic Model version 4. This is just an instance of my tool that I use that others could use, but I'm not saying that people they need to use PSM4. What I am suggesting is it's really handy to begin by training your accounts, and it's not really training, it's more like reinforcing it through good workflow practices like setting up project folders, minimize if it's a professional space, minimizing the one-off chats, what am I going to have for lunch, like use it as a workspace. So what I'm showing here, I just want to highlight a couple things real quick about PSM4 because it's not really the purpose. I have built a dashboard for myself that works in my main native ChatGPT account that's like 3 years old, and it's heavily governed with a lot of data where I can actually I can port in frameworks where the model understands the whole thing. But the header is what you're seeing on the screen. You'll see configurations. That's telling me that's a ChatGPT 5.5 thinking. PSM4 OPT4, those are basically telling me what I need to know about alignment, provenance, and attribution. But what's really important about the header is the config rationale and then the inserts, which are gate, MPS, and infeng. Very quickly, gate is scope control. The higher that I tell it to go with its scope or scope control, the less of a swath it's going to go. It's going to stay, the higher the number, the tighter the scope. Same thing with MPS. It's micro prune sequence. It's compression, pruning, as you might know of computer language. The higher number of compression I'm putting on it, the less it's going to dump. It's going to really stick to like bullets. So if I'm a high MPS number, it's doing more bullets, short statements. If I'm turning it low or off, I'm giving it an opportunity to be more expansive. Additionally, Infenge is inference engine. The higher number, the more reasoning depth. The lower, the more I just stick to the facts. And then the config rationale allows me to see what the model thinks it's saying. Now, am I getting into the programming of OpenAI or Claude? No. What it is, it's a shared lexicon that I can start up any new model and say, here's all these documents, here's the framework, here's the lexicon, here's what the configure. Give me what you think you're doing. And I can at least assess it. And the value of that is in real time, I'm working in a familiar workspace that is mine. I have a lexicon that I can share with the machine, so I can say, hey, that's too inferential. Let's turn down the infenge, and I don't have to explain it. And the less I have to do in each individual prompt, the less likely the model is going to go off the rails, right? At least in theory. So this is a dense and noisy looking. I'm just trying to show that it works. The left side of the screen, the governance portability, same operating lexicon, same scope language, same audit. Portability does not mean identical behavior. It means familiar surface. So for example, and then on the right, I'm just showing you screenshots of the different models, showing me my active workspace. So I'll bring in my native chat GPT and here I just go explain PSM4, and this is a new chat, so I'm not loading it in. Um, and so it may or may not spin up with a perfect configuration now. It often does, but it often doesn't as well. So in here, in this case, it did not. It did not give you my path 2.1, which is you don't need to know about. So just like I would do the other model, it's not correct. So, but here real quick, it shows you basically what I told you. So if I do calibrate, um, now I'm doing a calibration where I'm telling, get your headers. This is what the header is supposed to do. Here's the lexicon. Here's how we're going to work before I start doing an actual job. So boom, now and you're not going to notice it. It looks like, Greek to non-Greek speakers. So I understand that. But basically I have a dashboard that tells me what the model thinks it's doing, or at least how it thinks it should report to me. That gives me some kind of neutrality. Well, that's great for my governed workspace, but what about something like this Gemini account, which is a paid for account? But if you notice right here, I have all of the memory and save turned off, and every time I use it, I go back and say delete everything because I use it as a test bed. So in this case, I'm bringing in my PSM4 configuration, my framework I'm going to work in, and I'm just going to say calibrate, and we'll see what it does. It doesn't always work, and that's the key point of what I'm trying to get across today is not just do we get the AI work perfectly, but how do we make our workflows transparent, visible, and consistent so we get useful outputs and we can look at the what we get and we can audit those. Okay, look, so now Gemini is showing, oh, this is Gemini 3 Flash, but I get the same thing, the same inserts, but different numbers because how it's going to view it and its training is very different. But it gives me two things. A familiar workspace, actually more than two things, but a familiar workspace, a lexicon, and I can go audit records, entire long workflow transcripts from ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, which I'm using within that framework, and actually start to draw data on how do these actually behave differently? Which model might I use for different projects? So I just want to show that these are what's called model agnostic. In other words, when I'm not stuck to ChatGPT. If my organization, we started using ChatGPT and we got a sudden, a partnership with Anthropic and we're using Claude, we can just port that over. Okay, so real-time governance. This is what I'm speaking to, and I know this is dense. Again, for those that have the portfolio package, you can go in deep. But in the left, you're seeing the runtime visibility, which is what I just showed, and then the neutrality and authenticity, and then provenance. So I'm checking all of this. This is how I'm governing real time. How does it actually work though? So I've got my state reporting, which I just showed, the workflow initializer, which is basically like a master root workflow that I bring into my first chat in a project folder. And I say, I'm going to do all of this. Let's walk through what I'm going to need to do. Let's figure it all out. Let me upload all my key documents or tell you what to check and let's verify that data. And then we're going to work together and figure, let's break it into like 4 different steps. And then we're going to do what's called element chats, where we're going to spin off and we're going to do one element chat, just focus on this, and this is where we're going to use the SRA stack. the scope, realign, and audit. And then the executive audit comes later. But the big thing is realignment is a normal thing. Drift is going to be expected. These are probabilistic not models. So what we do is we start with our workflow initializer. We run the scope the SRA builder, and it's going to walk us through one question at a time. What's in scope, what's out of scope, what would success look like, what would failure like, what would cause drift likely, and just set it up. So it can be like 1 page to like 8 to 10 pages long, depending on the project that you're bringing in, and you're starting your workflow now, and it's aware of the workflow chat. Like the scope tells it this is part of a workflow. So when we hand it back off, we're going to use provenance stamps. And so the workflow chat isn't getting muddied up with like, oh, I had to fix this one thing in this element. It's just focusing on what did I output, what did I spin up with the scope, and what were the returns. And it's like a project manager. Realignment, it does two things. It's the model, especially, and these are designed for professional workspaces, high stakes, social work, mental health, hospital systems, intelligence services, things like that, where it's like, we need to have an audit trail. So realign is going to be something like we can realign to the original scope, or you can realign to a new and improved scope, which now we're going to cement. And then we can audit in process audits, end of process audits. They're going to tell us, how are we sticking to the scope? Is the model drifting? Is it overreaching? And then the executive audit is something we take once we take that final transcript and final outputs into a whole other separate chat that's not connected to the SRA stack. And then we were looking at, how did the whole process go? Did the human effectively set up the SRA stack? And how can we help with training? So this is not this is busy looking. I apologize. It's just to show that it exists. These are both multiple pages long, but these are just the first page screenshots of, here's how you set up the workflow initializer. Here's the builder. So again, this is just showing the workflow initializer, and then just three different replications of an element workflow, how they each have their own scope, reline, and audit, and then they hand off back to the workflow, which goes into portfolio. In this case, this is the AI doing what AI does. It knows I'm working on a portfolio, so it said portfolio evidence. So that's just specific to this thing. But it's basically, let's bring it all in, but we know what was done where, and so we can go check. So what maybe part of it's great, but there's one domain that's strange. We go back to that workflow chat, we can check that. We have provenance, we can audit. If we can audit, we can improve, and we can defend. This is just a screenshot of my native workspace for what I did for my internship, which I built a funding database, which was to over 2,500 unique organizations weighted to how likely they would be to support philanthropy. And this was on the heels of doing the access to care. Like I built the habits, and then I built the tools, and now I have tools where people can follow my path. And I use my own tools because they're really, really handy and they're reliable. So this is just showing, what a scope super prompt looks like on the left, and then it's a CSV, but it looks kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. And it's like, how do you go from a super prompt where I spun up all this and I want to do all this to like, oh, I got a bunch of returns, and then turning it into a preview dashboard inside of my actual AI. So I did all of this from first discussion to building my scope to doing, 4 months worth of research to compiling this to now I have things like, how many lanes of funding I have, how many of them, if you look at the right side, the action queue, it's like the 1,200 in the action queue are like, these are already vetted. These application paths are known good, their decision cadence is good. We've already checked that through the data, go. Research is like, we're not sure about the path, but it's viable. Let's check. So this is where like the durable skill of setting up a workflow and replicating it and doing it in-house, you get app-like quality, but it's customizable because everything in this dashboard I can change, move around, and wait. I'm not waiting for them. So additional evidence in the portfolio is bounded up where I have, where I was doing an asset map exercise for school, and the third-party app failed, so I had to use my scope rebase to like spin up and pull down all that data. So how does this fit into micro, meso, and macro? I'm going to start with the bottom line, in my opinion. Role clarity, scope, discipline, consent, evidence, self-correction, audibility, and human judgment boundaries. So we nail those first, and then we apply them accordingly to the slide, which, again, people can go back and read or just pause this video. So ethics is workflow controls, and I want to be really sincere about this because this is intentional. this is not speaking about NSAW or other ethics. Those are obviously very important, but we're not saying we're aligning our work with, no, we're saying this is how we are aligned. Okay. Transparency. We have visible operations. We're using transcripts. It's portable, which means it's model agnostic, which means we're not bound. We have agency to be free to not have to stay in a certain, to stay blind to the process. Like if we're on a model that's not working for us, we're not stuck. So we can port this anywhere we go. Bias and equity. Well, we have audit and evidence checks. We are making sure that we are everything that we do. Like I have a function that is part of the runtime. It's called PD1. It's provenance diagnostic. It's like in the canonical anchor to that is no anchor, no fact. So if the AI can't cite where it got this, it can't put it in. It can mention that it's there and that it's in quarantine, but it can't put it in. The human still has to check because AI will do what AI does. On this slide, it's one of my favorite slides because I looked at all these really important domain, and then I had this sentence, and it's like the more I looked at him, I was like, responsible use means knowing how workflows are scope built, tested. That one sentence, in my opinion, maps to every single one of these. It's like, well, how does dignity? Well, the dignity is because I have bias control and auditability, people aren't going to get broken down, clients and groups aren't broken down into numbers, right? It's actually, I'm being very anchored and methodical about how data is being represented, and I can trace it and I can show it. So the bounded claim, the limitations we all have to have, it makes it more visible, AI work more visible, steerable, useful, and audible. It does not make it reliable. This is why we have these processes. The other upside of having processes and skills, and these are durable skills that are simple to do. They seem difficult because I'm flying through it, but you're really just flying in a couple operations. You're scoping out your workspace, you're realigning it, you're auditing it, and then you're using your output in a world of agents. And I hear people like even instructors talking about, well, I'm getting students to teach agents. To me, that's red flag. That's my F-16 training. How are you auditing that? How are you scoping that? Are you just telling it and going doing it? That's a problem in an organizational level, and that's going to create institutional risk. So we want to have the ability and the skills to map this out. So this very last image is in the portfolio. I was getting ready for this presentation and I had all my system documents uploaded and I was kind of just messing around thinking about I needed some kind of image. I was like, and I said, create an artistic image just based off of these. And this is one of two images that it put out. And what's fascinating about this image, which I'll spin this up real quick and I'll do it in my Gemini, is when you bring in, let me find my Gemini. Okay, Gemini, as you can see, there's no memory there. And now I'm bringing in this called path to enablement image. It's so detailed that you can just bring it in and it understands it because it's breaking down. This image will be in the portfolio. You can try this, but if you think there's something I've done in the data, which I haven't, like in the file, you can take a screenshot or even a clear phone, image. And if, as long as the AI you load it up to can see all the words, it's going to understand that this is a socio-technical governance framework and it's going to start breaking it down. This was unintentional. This is the power of AI. One of the things I absolutely love about this image that was unintentional is there's artifacts, there's errors in it. There's two typos that I've found, and there's one additional error and I think that that's perfect because I think it speaks beautifully to the fact that AI is not perfect, no matter how amazing it seems. And even when it's imperfect, it's not unusable. But we are responsible for what the outputs are. And I think that having tools and methods, again, so what is the tool? It's not ChatGPT. It's not Claude. It's not a large language model. That's a substrate. That's an engine, right? The tool is the workflow, which includes methods and tools that are proprietary. So I'm not saying you need PSM4. I'm not even saying you have to use my SRA stack or workflow initializer, but I do believe that governance principles and workflow principles are pretty universal, and it's going to be likely to be something like that, depending on the kind of AI. And I think this is where we get into responsible, ethical, and professional use. Thank you for listening to me talk through all of that.